It began not with a grand revelation, but with the scent of settled time, of old dust and the dry crackle of attic floorboards underfoot. A century-old photograph, unearthed from a fog, sudden pallor washed over their faces. What they saw, hidden in plain sight, would leave historians speechless. "You must tell me in precise detail where you found this, now." Professor George Kramer's voice was a low, urgent command. He leaned so close to the brittle, time-worn envelope on Claire Donovan's desk that his breath threatened to disturb the fragile residue of the ages. Claire felt a disorienting mix of exhilaration and a primal, inexplicable dread. "I told you," she answered, swallowing a knot of anxiety. "It was in an old trunk. No labels, no names, just tucked beneath a stack of railway bonds and a tin of buttons." For decades, that trunk had gathered dust in the attic of her ancestral Connecticut home. She had set it aside at first, charmed by its tarnished brass latches and worn leather straps, relics from an era when travel was an adventure, not an itinerary. Inside lay the expected ghosts of a bygone life. Forgotten garments smelling of mothballs, bundles of fragile letters tied with faded ribbon, and a crumbling leather album. Claire nearly discarded the album until one photograph, profoundly different from the others, caught her eye. It was thicker, sealed in waxed paper, and exuded a strange, faint aroma, a mixture of dry tobacco and old glue. When she finally broke the wax seal, her breath caught in her throat. There, with a haunting, almost supernatural clarity, stood President Abraham Lincoln. His tall, gaunt frame, clad in a black frock coat and his famous stovepipe hat, dominated the right side of the frame. He stood beside an empty wooden chair, as if awaiting an unseen guest. To his left, frozen in full military regalia, was General Ulysses S. Grant. They were flanked by several other Union officers, sabers at their sides, captured mid-moment and suspended in time. But what stunned Claire to her core was the color. This was no crude hand tinting, no careful wash of watercolor over a monochrome print. It was as if someone had traveled back to the final, weary days of the Civil War with a modern camera. The blue of the uniforms was a deep, saturated indigo. The gold of the epaulets held a dull, authentic gleam. And Lincoln's face. His face was a study in exhaustion, a deathly pallor with a greyish undertone of fatigue that no black and white image had ever truly conveyed. It was a ghost from a past we thought we knew, a silent testament that history is not a closed book, but a story that is still, impossibly, being written. It was not a thing of monochrome memory, not a ghost rendered in silver and shadow, but a scene saturated with the hues of life itself, a moment from the American Civil War. Yet it held no trace of the familiar black and white. "I have never," Professor Martel Kramer uttered, the words catching in his throat. "I have." His academic composure, honed over 17 years of lecturing on Civil War-era photography at the State University of New York at Albany, simply fractured. He was the author of 3 definitive textbooks on 19th century photographic technologies, a man considered by his peers to be a living encyclopedia of the craft. But this defied every chapter he had ever written. "It is physically impossible," he continued, his finger trembling, hovering over the print. This was the hand that had steadied countless daguerreotypes and ambrotypes, a hand known for its surgical precision. For the first time in his professional life, it betrayed him with a tremor of pure disbelief. "Color emulsions," he explained, his voice a strained whisper, were not even theoretically developed until the late 1880s. They were a distant dream, a chemical phantom not to be summoned for decades. He tapped the corner of the print. And this is albumen silver paper. The standard.
Welcome to my channel. If you're fascinated by hidden truths, lost civilizations, and unsolved mysteries, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe and leave a like so you don't miss what's coming next. Because what you're about to see will change.
Of the 1860s. That process cannot support color. It is simply not in its nature. It is incapable of it. Claire's eyes flickered with the hope of a simple, rational explanation. So, it's a forgery? No, Kramer countered, the word a blade. His eyes, once wide with shock, narrowed into analytical slits. That is the most terrifying part. This is not a forgery. She hesitated, the question that had been burning on her tongue since she first laid eyes on the image finally escaping. Do you think... could it be valuable? A short, bitter laugh escaped Kramer's lips. Valuable does not begin to describe it, Claire. If this is genuine, it rewrites the entire visual history of the Civil War. He leaned closer, the gravity of his words filling the small room. The Smithsonian Institution, the Library of Congress. Damn it all, the British Museum itself would dispatch emissaries to vie for it at auction. This is not merely an artifact, it is a historical anomaly, a rupture in the known timeline. For a moment, Claire was adrift, caught between the elation of a jackpot winner and the profound dread of a desecrator, one who had disturbed something that was meant to remain buried in the quiet dust of history. Kramer adjusted his spectacles, his movements suddenly sharp, decisive, a man of theory thrust into an impossible reality. I am taking this to the New York Historical Society. I have colleagues there. They have equipment that can scan the print without damaging it by a single micron. We must know the truth. Claire wavered. She barely knew the professor, save for a pair of guest lectures in college and a single awkward conference dinner years ago. But the raw cocktail of professional hunger and existential dread in his voice was undeniable and utterly convincing. All right, she said, her own voice finding a new firmness. But I go with you, and I am kept informed of everything. No museums behind my back, no secrecy. He gave a curt, immediate nod. Agreed. With the reverence of a priest handling a holy relic, she carefully slipped the photograph back into its original waxed paper envelope, then placed it within a modern, acid-free container. Sanctuary of controlled temperature and hushed tones. A small team of lab technicians was already waiting. Among them stood two figures of formidable reputation. Dr. Elsa Turnboom, an expert in forensic imaging, whose eyes seemed to perceive the world in spectral bands invisible to others, and May Sonley, a paper conservator specializing in 19th century documents, whose touch was said to be a communion with the past, a dialogue with the very fibers of history. They gathered around a sterile examination table, the small protected photograph at its center commanding the silence of a cathedral. The unwrapping of the waxed paper envelope was a hushed surgical procedure. As the impossible colors were once again revealed under the neutral laboratory lights, a collective professional stillness fell upon the room. They were not merely examining a photograph, they were peering into a crack in the fabric of history, preparing to ask a question that could unravel everything they thought they knew about the world that was. Human hands could work miracles with splintering matter, with the very fabric of light and time. In the controlled quiet of the laboratory, as the team unsealed the protective container, the air grew heavy, thick with the silence of anticipation. Decades of careful preservation had led to this single moment. Dr. Elsa Vance drew on a pair of thin nitrile gloves. With a touch as delicate as one might grant the wing of a butterfly, she placed the photograph beneath the scanner's high-resolution lens. Her eyes met Kramer's across the console. Ready?
If you think you've seen everything, wait. What comes next will turn everything upside down.
He gave a single, sharp nod. The monitor blinked, then flooded with an image of impossible clarity. It was a scene from a world away, yet rendered with a presence that felt immediate, almost alive. The Union uniforms were not merely blue, but a profound, living indigo that seemed to absorb the light. President Lincoln's suit was an inky blackness so absolute it held its own gravity, the faint creases at the knees a testament to a long and weary journey. One could discern the fine, pale dust settled upon the officer's boots, the weary fraying at the hem of Lincoln's trousers, and even the intricate hand-carved filigree on a simple wooden chair. "I am telling you," Elsa began, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This is no manual coloration. These pigments are bonded into the very structure of the print itself." She leaned closer to the screen. "It resembles an early Kodachrome, but it predates that technology by half a century. It shouldn't exist." Albumin prints cannot hold chromogenic dyes. Their chemical structure simply rejects them, whispered Mason, the words a quiet prayer against the impossible. "And yet," Elsa countered, her gaze fixed on the screen, "this one somehow has held on." As the scan progressed, the computer began to spool data, translating the physical object into cold, hard fact. Paper composition, late 19th century formula. Binding agent, gum arabic. Color layer, an unknown organic pigment, with spectral signatures suggesting a base of beetroot and indigo. Then came the final, stunning piece of the puzzle. Estimated date of creation, April 1865, plus or minus 5 years. Claire Margulies looked up from the data stream. "So, you're saying this photograph was taken at the very end of the Civil War?" "Approximately," Kramer confirmed, his voice low. "And if the date is precise, it could have been taken during General Lee's surrender at Appomattox." A current passed through the room. Claire's heart began to beat faster. She retrieved her laptop, its quiet hum the only sound breaking the spell. She began cross-referencing the faces of the officers against archival data, employing a specialized comparison tool. Grant was unmistakable. General Meade, too. The others required more painstaking work, but slowly, matches began to emerge from the digital ether. All but one. A slender figure stood directly between Lincoln and Grant. His expression was serious, yet serene. He was not posing for history, he was observing it. Claire froze. "That face, I've seen it before." Kramer leaned over her shoulder. "He's not on any official roster of officers present that day. Perhaps a personal aide or a civilian volunteer in uniform." Claire shook her head, a strange chill tracing a path down her. She produced her phone and opened a scanned copy of a family photograph dated 1912. A much older man stood before a barn, a dog held gently in his arms. But the architecture of the face, the line of the jaw, the distinct shape of the ears, even the subtle arch of the brows, they were nearly identical. Kramer squinted, the scholar's skepticism warring with the undeniable evidence before him. "You think that's him?" "I know it is." In that moment, Claire remembered an old letter, a story her grandfather had once told her.
Welcome to my channel. If you're fascinated by hidden truths, lost civilizations, and unsolved mysteries, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe.
It was written in the 1920s by her great-grandfather, speaking of his father, the man who now stared out from two separate centuries. The image on the screen was no longer just an artifact. It was a bridge, a silent testament connecting her world to his. History is not a static collection of dates and names sealed under glass. It is a living current, a river of stories that sometimes flows unseen just beneath the surface of our own lives. And every so often, a single impossible object can break through, reminding us that the past is never truly past. It is merely waiting for the right pair of eyes to see it anew. William Donovan, a medic of the American Civil War, officially a ghost, vanished into the fog of conflict in April of 1865. His only epitaph, a desperate plea found in a family letter generations later. The photograph with the chair was never meant to be kept. Burn it if ever it is found. That same night, in the solitary quiet of her apartment, the glow of a computer screen illuminated the face of Claire, a researcher haunted by this posthumous warning. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, summoning the spectre of William Donovan from the digital archives of the war. The official file was stark, clinical. Rank, medic. Unit, the 14th New York Infantry Regiment. Last known whereabouts, April 6, 1865, near Appomattox Courthouse. The status was a cold, final judgment, missing in action. The last entry noted he was absent during the final roll call of his company, a man swallowed by the chaos of a nation's endgame. So why, Claire wondered, did he appear in a photograph dated April 9th, a full 3 days after he had officially ceased to exist? And why was he standing just a few feet from President Abraham Lincoln himself? She wrote to Kramer, her superior, her message a single, urgent line. The reply that met her the next morning was shorter still. To the lab, immediately. You'll want to see this. Claire burst into the laboratory, the low thrum of machinery a familiar hum she barely registered. Kramer, a man of few words and immense knowledge, offered no greeting. He simply gestured to the main display, where an image glowed, a page from a rarely accessed War Department journal, its entries sparse and cryptic. There, a single mention of a Donovan, personally selected by Abraham Lincoln in the first days of April 1865. But the designation was wrong. It was not medic. It was personal escort for sensitive movements between encampments. Claire blinked, processing the anachronism. You mean a bodyguard? More than a bodyguard, Kramer said in final chaotic days. The entry showed that Donovan had been clandestinely transferred from his regiment 3 days before General Lee's surrender. There were no official orders, no paper trail, only a scrawled field note, a ghost in the bureaucratic machine. D transferred to Shadow Post at AL's request. Do not log. Weapon not to be drawn unless exigent. A wave of vertigo washed over Claire. He had not vanished.
If you think you've seen everything, wait. What comes next will turn everything upside down.
He had been erased. Suddenly, the saber hanging at his side in the photograph, an object that had seemed so out of place for a simple medic, acquired a chilling significance. Donovan was not there to tend to the wounded. He was there to create them, if necessary. He had been placed beside the president not to be seen, but to see everything, to intervene. He was someone Lincoln trusted enough to stand among his generals, a silent sentinel cloaked in a medic's uniform. Someone so secret, so deeply embedded, that history itself had forgotten he ever existed.
But if he was that vital, why did his own family believe he had been lost to the war? Why did he himself command that the only proof of his true service be consigned to the flames? A profound silence fell over the lab as the team, Claire, Kramer, Elsa and Mason, stared at the image, searching for an answer that the written record refused to yield. Elsa leaned closer, her cursor moving slowly over the high-resolution scan of William Donovan's uniform.
"Wait," she whispered. "There's something sewn here." With trembling fingers, she magnified the image, pushing the digital file to the very edge of its integrity. There, tucked beneath a fold of wool, almost completely obscured by the edge of an officer's collar, was a tiny embroidered device, no larger than a thumbnail. The stitches, though minuscule, were unmistakable. 3 letters woven into the fabric of a forgotten history. P.S.S. Kramer's voice was a near inaudible whisper, heavy with the weight of a secret kept for over a century. The Provost's Security Service. The air in the room grew still. This was not a bodyguard. This was a member of a clandestine unit, the forerunner to the Secret Service, tasked with protecting the president from threats both foreign and domestic. Donovan was a phantom, operating in the deepest shadows of the conflict, his existence a strategic liability. His disappearance was not a tragedy of war, but a carefully executed protocol. To be seen with the president was to have his cover blown, to endanger the entire invisible network. The photograph was not a memento. It was a mistake, a breach of security that could unravel everything. His family was told he was missing, because in every official sense he was. The man they knew, the medic, had to die so that the protector could live on, unremembered. History is not merely the story of what is recorded, but a vast and silent ocean of what has been deliberately lost. It is a narrative shaped as much by the ink on the page as by the erasures in the margins. In the face of a single, forbidden photograph, the life of one man is rewritten, and we are reminded that the truest sacrifices are often the ones for which no medals are ever struck, no names ever carved in stone. They are the silent duties performed by ghosts whose only reward is to be forgotten. The words materialized from the shadows of the old photograph, stitched into the dark wool of a uniform. Presidential Escort Committee. A chill descended upon the room. Elsa's face, illuminated by the screen, had lost its color. In the formal records of the United States government, no such organization had ever been chartered, not in the year 1865, not officially. But whispers had persisted through the decades, ghost stories told in the hushed archives of Washington. Kramer, his eyes fixed on the image, slowly shook his head. The rumors spoke of a clandestine group formed in the final, desperate weeks of the Civil War, a cadre of unregistered operatives who answered to one man and one man alone, the president. They were his spies, his couriers, his most trusted guards, soldiers whose loyalty Lincoln valued more than that of his own cabinet. Claire's voice was a strained whisper. "And William Donovan, he was one of them?" But that was not the most chilling discovery. "That isn't the worst part," Elsa breathed, her fingers coaxing yet more detail from the aged emulsion. The image magnified again, pushing the limits of the silver halide crystals. There, just beneath the insignia, almost invisible, was a second message. A phantom script, stitched with a thread only a single shade light.
Welcome to my channel. If you're fascinated by hidden truths, lost civilizations, and unsolved mysteries, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe and leave a like so you don't miss what's coming next. Because what you're about to see will change everything.
Lighter than the dark serge of the coat. A single phrase and a single date.
Target confirmed. Wait until April 14th. Breadth a cloud of frozen vapor. April 14th. The night the nation's fragile peace was shattered. The night Abraham Lincoln slumped forward in his box at Ford's Theatre. Claire recoiled from the screen as if struck. "Are you saying William knew?" Kramer offered no reply. The implications branched out into a dozen horrifying possibilities. If the message was genuine, Donovan was aware of the conspiracy against the president. Was he part of a team attempting to thwart it? Or was he awaiting an order to act that, for some tragic reason, never arrived? Or worse, far worse, was he silenced before he could sound the alarm? A torrent of understanding flooded Claire's mind. This was the reason for his disappearance. This was why his family had been instructed to burn this very photograph. It was never just a historical artifact, a memento of service. It was proof, evidence of his secret role in the president's final days and his proximity to the plot that would decapitate a nation. Just as the shock threatened to overwhelm them, Elsa spoke again, her voice regaining a clinical focus. "I think I understand the light." She gestured to the spectral analysis data scrolling across a secondary monitor. The pigment, she explained, was not a modern addition. It had been embedded during the development, a hybrid method of breathtaking rarity. Hand-tinted emulsions mixed with light reactive oils, an obscure, almost irreproducible process. But she paused, her finger tracing a line in a digital archive. There was one reference. A small experimental team within the War Department working on a new form of photographic preservation, under the direct and personal authorization of the President himself. Claire stared, the question hanging in the air between them. "You mean Lincoln? He commissioned this photograph?" Kramer stepped forward, his expression one of profound realization. He didn't want a piece of propaganda, he stated, his voice low. He wanted a legacy, an image that would speak a truth too dangerous for its own time, a message that would lie dormant until it was needed. The theory was cemented later when the team unearthed a forgotten diary entry. It belonged to a former assistant of the famed photographer Timothy O'Sullivan, and it was dated 1866. The entry spoke of a peculiar assignment, a portrait commissioned directly by the president, one that required a special chromatic treatment for the purpose of archival legacy. It was this photograph. After more than a century lost to time, it had finally surfaced. Mason nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of their discovery. This photograph was not merely a portrait of men on the edge of history. It was a vessel, a carefully constructed crypt designed to carry a secret that its creator, Abraham Lincoln, would take to his grave. And for more than a century and a half, someone, perhaps Donovan himself, had ensured it remained sealed. A silent testament waiting for the one moment in the future when the light would be just right, and the truth, in all its terrible complexity, would finally be revealed. The photograph, once a forgotten family heirloom, now resided within a high-security vault under the careful custodianship of the New York Historical Society. But its copies, perfect in every granular detail, began to circulate in whispers among a trusted circle of historians. For Claire, the decision to bring it into the light was not for notoriety. It was an act of historical justice, a mission to complete a story her own great-great-grandfather had begun. Within a single week,
The Smithsonian Institution had made contact. The Library of Congress requested access to high-resolution scans, but Claire deflected every offer, guided by an intuition that the full story had not yet been told. She found her proof hidden in the deepest folds of the original photo album, tucked inside a faded, unassuming envelope. There lay a single sheet of handwritten correspondence. The address was stark in its simplicity: William from A.L. The date, however, was anything but simple: April 10th, 1865, just 4 days before the assassination. With gloved hands, Claire held the brittle paper as the archivist read the words aloud. My dearest William, if this war has taught us anything, it is that truth rarely survives the men who need it most. You were chosen not to expose the saber, but to stand in plain sight among those who do. What we make of the world will test us more than what we made of the war. So stand where you are not expected. Watch those who must be watched. And if history forgets you, let it be that I do not. A.L. A slow, measured breath escaped into the silent room. It was all true. William Donovan had not been erased by history. He had deliberately stepped into its shadows. No recognition, no title, no reward. And now, after a century spent in a dusty chest, his silent service had finally been seen. A museum exhibition was created, its title A Quiet Monument. The man who remained standing, the forgotten shadow of Lincoln's final days. At the heart of the exhibition stood the photograph, a faithful replica. Beside it, the full biography of William Donovan, and printed above a hauntingly empty chair, a replica of the one in the image, was a single quote from Lincoln's letter. Some fight with swords, others with silence. Claire stood quietly during the opening, watching as visitors lingered before the image. She needed no one to call him a hero. It was enough that they finally saw him, not as a riddle holding a saber, but as a witness who bore the weight of history and the price of its preservation, entirely alone. It began with a simple act, the decision to magnify an image, to look closer. It serves as a quiet testament that history is not a static monolith, but a living mosaic, with entire worlds hidden in its smallest fragments. The past is never truly settled. It only waits for a new pair of eyes, daring enough to question the empty spaces and to ask who was standing there, just beyond the frame.
Welcome to my channel. If you're fascinated by hidden truths, lost civilizations, and unsolved mysteries, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe and leave a like so you don't miss what's coming.